In March 1966, the World Bank and the IMF, two of the world's biggest financial institutions, supported a coup in Indonesia that replaced the country's first president, Sukarno, with a narcissistic dictator called Suharto. Backed by the United States and the United Kingdom, Suharto took power and his regime became one of the most corrupt and bloody periods in Indonesia's modern history. What followed was a ruthless massacre that left over 500,000 civilians dead, and after ruling for 31 continuous years, he left his office with a staggering net worth of $38 billion of corrupt money straight out of the World Bank's coffers. You see, the West did not like the former president because he took aid from the USSR during the Cold War, which made them fear Indonesia would align itself with pro-communist ideologies. During this period, communism was the West's biggest enemy, and communists were seen as radicals and a fundamental threat to abundance, prosperity, and freedom. The United States became extremely frustrated by Sukarno, who seemed to play the two blocs in the Cold War against each other. So it backed internal rebellions that destabilized Sukarno's power. He spoke against the United States' interference with the country's internal affairs to the UN. Britain, on the other hand, had rebranded its control in Malaysia without his consultation, which Sukarno hated. He argued that Malaysia was a British puppet state, a neo-colonial experiment, and that any expansion of Malaysia would increase British control over the region, with implications for Indonesia's national security. As a way to pull Sukarno to their side, the United States used the IMF by sending some of its officials to tour Indonesia in 1962 and ended up proposing financial aid on the condition that they cooperate with the fund, aka the West. This ended up being a sweet deal for the Indonesian government, as what followed was a chain of loans. First, the United States sent a $17 million loan, then another one of $400 million, then another $50 million loan. But as soon as Sukarno learnt of the new agreement between the British and Malaysia to form a federation, which he saw as a maneuver to destabilize his power, he reacted by nationalizing British firms. This angered the IMF, which it saw as a breach of their agreement for the loans. But Indonesia proceeded to leave the United Nations because of frustrations from the West. Both the US and the British played an equal role in the overthrowing of Sukarno. 6 days after the turnover of power to Suharto, the United States government announced that it was opening up a line of credit for Indonesia, amounting to $8.2 million. The United States was particularly pleased. So pleased that the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, on tour of his troops in Vietnam, praised the Indonesian model in a speech there. Even though the first president failed to improve his country economically, the president that took over after the coup did way worse. According to the 2004 Transparency International World Report on Corruption, Mohamed Suharto was the most corrupt leader in the world, embezzling between $15 and $35 billion between 1967 and 1998. The development budget meant for infrastructures ended up funding redecoration of government buildings or the purchase of officials' vehicles, and not the improvement of public welfare. Privatization of companies involved handing over companies to family and friends and executing anyone that was on his way. This has been one of the best historical case studies that criticizes the role of the World Bank in geoeconomics and the distribution of power in its higher-ups. While the World Bank prides itself as an organization reducing global poverty through development, many critics argue that this is a smokescreen. In this video, we will explore the role the World Bank plays in today's global economy. Is the World Bank used by Western powers to influence their geopolitical interests? And are the economic reforms demanded by the World Bank for its loans used to benefit transnational Western companies? Welcome to another project. In 1944, the United States and 44 other countries met in New Hampshire at the Bretton Woods Conference to plan the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the Monetary Fund to help rebuild the European economy after World War II. Despite a slow start, its first loan was offered to France in 1947, and in the 1970s, it focused on loans to developing countries. And since then, the impact of the World Bank is undeniable. It successfully helped rebuild Europe post-World War, establish international trade and development, and encouraged peace among its members. Many decades later, the World Bank has become an international financial institution that provides loans and grants to the governments of low and middle-income countries for the purpose of pursuing capital projects. But the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. You see, China today is seen as the poster child for debt trap diplomacy, a term that in finance is used to describe when a country or institution extends debt to a borrowing country in order to gain political leverage, either partially or entirely. But that term was usually reserved for the IMF. Before we continue, consider liking and subscribing below. It goes a long way in supporting the channel. The International Monetary Fund has been accused of predatory lending and of keeping emerging economies in debt. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have imposed structural adjustment programs as a condition for loans, which are frequently given to governments who view these loans as a last resort. They've been accused of driving up poverty by lobbying for privatization, as well as having ulterior motivations, such as acquiring power over those countries' central banks. According to the Committee for the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt, the World Bank and the IMF have systematically extended loans to states as a means of influencing their policies. The IMF has decided which nations will receive loans based on geopolitical factors rather than only on economic factors. One of the perfect examples is the 1979 energy crisis. The World Bank responded by issuing structural adjustment loans to help failing countries. This ended up only working for countries that had resources to implement the structural adjustments the World Bank demanded. For the rest, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth regressed and inflation worsened. African countries increased their borrowing from China to the tune of $94.5 billion between 2000 and 2014, as they tried to reduce their reliance on the IMF and World Bank, which require market liberalization in exchange for loans. African countries decided to pick the lesser evil between the World Bank and China out of necessity. The delegation of power in the World Bank has been seen as a form of imperialism that benefits the richer countries because they are an elite group that keep and maintain their monopoly, while impoverishing the poor through policies such as selling poor countries' natural resources to foreign investors, which in turn makes them poorer from there on out. The World Bank, in particular, is accused of having leaders of a sole national interest, especially for the United States, and not necessarily for the benefit for all countries. You see, the president of the World Bank is traditionally American, which does not help either because they probably have biased opinions about developing countries. Additionally, the headquarters are in Washington, D.C., right across the street from the White House, which have made a lot of anti-imperialists see it as a puppet for the United States government. The U.S. also has the most voting power in the entire bloc, with 15%, followed by Japan, China, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Italy. The rest of countries have to share an opinion in something known as pool model, which is of course a logistical nightmare, considering all these countries have differing opinions and interests. The World Bank has made an undeniable progress in reducing poverty and investing in smaller economies using loans and grants. It has helped cushion a lot of countries during crisis, but one cannot help but wonder what they could achieve if they rethought their strategy and maybe adjust their business model. Let us know in the comments, what do you think of the World Bank's complicated history? We'll be lurking below to see your interesting takes. To see the dangers of a digital dollar, click here, and to learn how Luxembourg became Europe's hidden tax haven, click here. That's all we have today. Thanks for watching.